You're listening to The Weather Junkies.
Oh boy. Large wedge tornado coming up into Tuscaloosa. A winter storm warning is in effect for our area.
So we can expect at least another 2 to 4 inches overnight. Then that snow.
The National Weather Service in Huntsville has issued a tornado warning for northwestern Madison.
14 to 22 inches of snow!
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Weather Junkies. I'm Dakota Smith. I'm out here in Colorado, Mead, Colorado. It's a wonderful day in Colorado, overcast skies. Highs didn't even get into the 80s, which is pretty uncommon for the weather that we've been having recently. Basically, been getting in the 90s, upper 80s every day. So it was a pleasant day in Colorado along the Front Range, and we can expect a little bit of that tomorrow and Saturday as well. It's actually a solo show tonight again. Tyler can't join us tonight, unfortunately. It's a busy time of year for him. He has Little League going on. He volunteers for them, and he also has his regular job on air. So just be me tonight, but we do have an awesome interview to bring to you tonight from Eric Roston, and we'll get to that in a bit. But let's get to our tweets this week, and because it's a solo show, just be my opinion on the tweets. So this first tweet comes from the Capital Weather Gang. The tweet says, NBC's new storm chaser radar trucks, scientific value ad or total gimmick? And it was a pretty good article that kind of summarizes what these trucks are supposed to be used for based on what NBC put out, and then some input from various experts and research scientists about what they actually are going to be able to do. Basically, it's talking about you're going to have to get those trucks with the radar on it. If you want anything useful, you're going to have to get them in the right spot at the right time, just because of the technology that's on them. And so I don't think it really matters from a science standpoint whether whether they're adding to the science or whether they're just a gimmick, because it's NBC's money and they're going to do what they're going to do with it. I think it will maybe add a little bit to the user, the viewer. That's up for debate, and we'll certainly see that as they start to use these Doppler on wheel trucks. And DAOs are used commonly for field campaigns, severe weather field campaigns, and those are heavily used for research. And we get a lot of great data. Some of the groundbreaking data we've gotten from them to show us how tornadoes and certain severe weather phenomena form and continue. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do with those trucks. I will probably bring it up when Tyler's back on, because I believe he actually might have access to one of those as he's at an NBC station. So I'm curious to what he thinks about that. Our next tweet tonight is from the National Weather Service. You can follow them at NWS, and their tweet says 6 inches of swiftly moving water can knock an adult off of his or her feet. And this is, flash flooding is one of the, if not the most, the deadliest weather phenomenon. And a lot of people actually die from driving on flooded roadways. So it's always important to highlight the threat that flooding brings. And a little bit of a pitch here. You probably listened to it, but if you didn't, the last Weather Ready or Not, which is kind of a side podcast that I've been doing, was about this. So if you haven't listened to that, check it out. It was last week's episode of the Weather Junkie. It was a little fill-in. I was on vacation, so decided to have a recorded episode that week. And finally, our last tweet comes from Tyler Jankowski, my co-host here. I figured since he wasn't going to be on the show, I'd bring a tweet from him just so he has a little bit of commentary on the show. And his tweet says, a Connecticut exclusive, the first and only 10-day forecast on local news in this market. There's a lot of mixed opinions on long-range forecasts outside of 7 days, whether they're useful, whether they beat climatology or things like that. So I'm curious what Tyler thinks about this. I think if you can beat climatology consistently, then it can be useful. Who actually remembers, though? One opinion I hear all the time, and I kind of agree with the sentiment. If it's a Friday and you're looking forward to the weekend, who cares about the weather next Friday? You're looking forward to the weekend. It helps with long range planning, but kind of day to day, it's hard to remember all that, and especially when the forecast changes within that 10 days. So yeah, mixed opinions on that, but it's cool that they're the only station in their market that has the 10-day forecast. So yeah, it'd be cool to get Tyler's input on that as well. So let's get to the main segment tonight, and that is from Eric Roston at Bloomberg. I give him a little intro in the interview, so I won't do too much of that here. But I just have to say it was really cool that he joined us. He put out this article titled "Rain Bombs," or sorry, the title was "Forget Tornadoes, Rain Bombs are coming for a town near you," and it created quite the stir. Yeah, especially in the meteorological community, people were wondering where the heck he got the rain bomb term. And in the interview, we dig into that and actually figure out why he used rain bomb. And so it was just cool that after getting outraged and criticized, including me, I openly criticized him on Twitter, and he agreed to come on the show and chat with me and try to make the conversation constructive. And I think that was pretty cool of him. It sounds like he's talked with other meteorologists as well to take some constructive pieces of it. So without further ado, let's get to that interview with Eric. And now we're joined by Eric Roston from Bloomberg.com. Eric got a bachelor's in European history, a master's in Russian history, but from Columbia University. He was also the author of The Carbon Age in 2008, and he previously wrote for Time, and he spent some time as the senior associate in Washington, D.C. office of the Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions at Duke. And now he's writing for Bloomberg, covering science and technology. Eric, thanks for taking some time to talk with us.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm curious right off the bat, how did you get into writing about climate science and technology so much, given your background? I'm curious about the path you took.
Sure, it sounds non-linear, and I suppose it was. I spent a lot of time in the 90s in Russia and doing research in Russian history in grad school. But by the time I was done with that and got to Time magazine, Russian was really the only thing I knew, and the main thing that Russia has going for it is energy. Since about 2000, I started covering energy issues, and just really through competitive assessment of what that magazine was doing at that time and other magazines, I just it seemed like business sections weren't doing a great job trying to understand these long-term environmental issues like climate change from a business perspective. That's really how I got into it, maybe, I guess, more than 15 years ago at this point.
Gotcha. And so a common thing that I see, especially in my kind of echo chamber, is people criticizing writers who don't have a science background. But then on the flip side, I myself including, I see good writers and communicators criticizing scientists who can't communicate to save their life. So I'm curious, where do you think the balance is there? And have you ever gotten that criticism at your time at Bloomberg?
I think that's probably a good summation of the natural state of affairs. It would be surprising if it were any different than that. It's always a fine line, and I think the most important thing in resolving that discussion is really who the audience is, and and even from where I am now, the audience can sort of vary depending on just the kind of piece it is, the length of the piece it is, the time I spent reporting it. It's a conversation. I think I was surprised by the reaction last week to this article, but yeah, I don't think there's I don't have very many run-ins with I guess really like episodes like last week. I mean,
Yeah.
normally I write about a really vast and always have written about a vast spectrum of sciences, and generally people are we have great conversations with people, and we talk through issues, and so the rabbit just kind of comes out of the hat at the end, but not always.
Yeah, so that's a perfect segue, because your article last week was, it caught my attention, caught a lot of people's attention. Some may argue that it served its purpose because it actually caught people's attention. But if you didn't read it yet, I recommend go ahead and giving it a read on Bloomberg.com. You probably Google the title. The title is "Forget Tornadoes, Rain Bombs Are Coming for Your Town." I criticized some of the language. Overall, my take was that I thought it was well written and had a lot of good information backed by peer review research. But the sensationalized title in other language made it a little less, accurate, or it maybe didn't help communicate or add to the scientific discussion. There was a ton of outrage, from meteorologists mainly on Twitter. I didn't see any other social media site. So what was that like, just getting bombarded by a niche group of scientists and on-air meteorologists on one article?
Well, you just want to see what's really going on and what the conversation is actually about. If there's anything wrong with the story, then that's absolutely paramount. So basically, my take is just read everything everyone's sending you, acknowledge that you've read it, sort of weigh everything as it's coming in. And Twitter, I think something particularly needs to be said about Twitter, which I really do liken it to driving in a way, because when you're driving and somebody cuts somebody else off, or there's a near accident or something, there's a lot of emotion, a lot of anger that can come up instantaneously. But because you're driving a car, you have a very limited visual impression of the other person, and a very limited means of expressing your unhappiness, basically with a horn. And Twitter's very similar in that it can cause these conflicts that can cut pretty deep, but anyone who's involved in it is very restrained in their capacity to actually explore the issue. So my take generally is let's just get off Twitter and get on the phone. So I think that that's what happened last week, and I've had multiple calls with people who were engaged on Twitter, and it's just a much more productive, much more interesting, and generally helpful way to move these conversations into a more productive format once it's identified on Twitter that you have something to talk about.
Yeah, so I love that analogy. And I noticed that you were sharing a lot of the opinions that people were sending you, and you were interacting with people, which I think that's one of the best ways I've ever seen someone handle that kind of outrage from at least the weather community. Because I've seen it before, and I don't know, people either shut down or go on the offense. And so I'm curious, what constructive pieces came out of some of those conversations, both on and off social media?
Sure. Well, I've actually been just tinkering here and there with a piece about specifically TV meteorologists and climate change. So the piece that we're talking about that you referenced earlier, it was just it came together kind of quickly. A lot of mornings you walk in this media environment and you have no idea what you're going to be working on in 2 hours. So this was a day story that came together pretty quickly, and so but the topic had sort of just been generally in my mind because of there's been a conversation probably for at least 10 years about the relationships of TV meteorologists in particular to climate science. And my impression is that there's been a lot of change, and that it just kind of warrants a new look. And so that's just kind of, I've had the topic has just sort of been front of mind. And so the conversations I've been having as a result last week will just result, over the next days and weeks of, just further reporting really.
Yeah.
As that sort of nebulous topic becomes more of a story.
So it was the first time I've ever seen the term used, rain bomb, and I was just curious what led to that term being used.
I saw it informally on the web in a blog post, but didn't trust that was a real thing. And so I did basically like a 30-year newspaper search on the phrase, and it came up like, I don't know, 2 or 3 times within the last 10 years of meteorologists using it to describe, really what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of water coming out of the sky very quickly. And it's a phrase that has, great explanatory power. And a good way to, I think, visualize, what the story was in my mind actually about, which is the increase in not only total precipitation in the U.S., but an even faster increase in extreme precipitation in the U.S. And the funny thing about the article is, that it was a sort of a chatty trend piece. The main point that I had hoped to make was look at this research on the acceleration of extreme precipitation in the U.S. But it's a very chatty piece, and the downside of that, I think, contributed to the conversation on Twitter, which was he's talking about the weather. But if you look at the piece, I read it a little while ago again before we went on. The first part of it is just talking about extreme weather in general, and then like the middle part of it, which is something I still try to do a lot, is just lay out the very basic structure of climate change. Just because in the U.S. it's still there are elements of U.S. public discourse that are resistant to keeping those front of mind, and then commentary therein about again, extreme precipitation. So one of the conclusions I have is just, sometimes these, I'll do a day story and it'll just be kind of discursive and chatty, and it'll create confusion as to what the point of the story is. And it seems like that was one of the ingredients in this conversation. So my bad there. But that was, I think, an interesting takeaway too. Was the conversation we had on Twitter didn't actually have anything to do with what the story was.
Yeah. Funny how that happens.
Yeah, and again, I'm not innocent in that because the tone of the story is in a chatty, internet-friendly sort of way. So, but again, it's like here we are chatting. I'm making other contacts and friends as a result of Twitter, which is just a horrible way to communicate with anybody.
Yeah, I agree there. So we're listening to a conversation with Eric Roston right now of Bloomberg.com, and overall, his message is, he's trying to communicate climate change and some of the impacts that peer-reviewed research has discovered that may happen in the future. But maybe rain bomb wasn't the best term to use for this. He put it in his own words. You can take it from what you think. But yeah, really good insight here, and it was really cool talking with him. We have about 4 minutes left of the interview, so let's get to that. So real quick, canceling out all the rain bomb outrage noise, can you gauge how people are getting the climate change message and the heavier precipitation event message?
There's been a lot of movement, according to public opinion professionals, in what Americans think about climate change and why in the last several years. And the number one mover is probably the uptick in extreme weather. So,
gotcha.
Yeah. And there's even been all kinds of behavioral research. I did a study like a year or two ago. This group at Columbia University that studied the intersection of public opinion and climate change at the time of the year that the polls are conducted. And so there's this like heat premium that you get more people understanding climate science in the middle of the summer than you do in the middle of winter. So I think that's the main driver, and that just creates a sort of cognitive window for more people to read about this stuff and try to get their heads around the science to the extent that it can be made interesting for anybody.
Gotcha. And final question here that we ask everyone who comes on: what advice would you give to young writers who might want to write about science and technology in the future?
Do it. When I was on the younger end of this conversation, which was, I'm not old by any stretch of the imagination, but given the fact that we've been through something bigger than the Gutenberg press revolution, there were things called career paths, and so you wanted to get on a career path that was going to be fruitful. And now everybody has his or her own printing press, and there are so many examples, particularly in the science community, of people who just started writing, and you don't want to be irresponsible. You want to make sure you're putting out a product that is going to resonate with the viewers who you want it to resonate with. But the opportunity to just refine what it is you want to do and do it is unprecedented in world history. So it's also easier to, because of things like Twitter and social media, it's easier to meet people who are doing things that you also want to be doing, and to casually make relationships that way.
I love the first bit of that. Do it. That's like, it seems simple, but that it goes a long way if you just start doing what you want to do.
I mean, just 25 years ago, if you wanted to write an essay, you wrote the essay, then you mailed it to 10 people. Now you just write the essay and put it out, and publish it.
Yeah, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to check out Eric's book, The Carbon Age. Feel free to check that out, and his work at Bloomberg.com. And you can follow him at @Roston. Eric, thanks so much for joining us and having this conversation with so many meteorologists. I think we really appreciate it, and you don't have to do it, so it's really awesome to see. So thanks for joining us.
Okay, thanks so much for having me.
And that was my conversation with Eric Roston that I had earlier this week. He was talking about his article concerning rain bombs and more precipitation during rain events due to climate change. So really great conversation. Sorry about the audio; it was a little quiet on his end. It was via the phone, so I didn't have enough time to bring his audio all the way up. I tried my best, but yeah, sorry about that. And I think that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we have an awesome show to bring you. We're going to have climate scientist Michael Mann on the show. It's going to be a pretty awesome show. So tune in again next week. We'll be here live at Thursday at 8 p.m. Thanks, and see you tomorrow. Next week, sorry.
Cow. I gotta go, Julia. We got cows.